This small village did not have many people at all to begin with. Now with the blizzard going, nobody is coming out at night. Even if someone witnessed what just happened, they would have run back home a long time ago. Who has guts to come out to inspect and ask questions? Yang Tai-zin took out shovels and hoes, and the three of them buried all of the bodies into one big grave. Bao Ziruo picked up a broom and started to sweep the traces of blood on the snow. After a while, she suddenly felt the smell of blood go straight into her stomach. Her eyes went back for a second as she let out a little scream and sat down on the snow-covered ground. Yang Tai-zin was shocked and immediately ran over to help her up, all the while asking over and over, "What's the matter?" Bao Ziruo's eyes were closed and she did not answer. Seeing her white face and feeling her cold hands, Yang Tai-zin just got more and more worried. Qu Chuji came over, grabbed Bao Ziruo's right wrist, and felt her pulse for a bit. Suddenly he burst out laughing and said, "Congratulations! Congratulations!" Yang Tai-zin was quite taken aback and asked, "What?" At this time Bao Xuo suddenly woke up with a yin. Seeing the three men standing around her, she can't help but get a little shy and immediately walked back into the house. Qu Chuji said with a smile, "Your wife is pregnant." Yang Tai-zin can't quite believe it and asked, "Really?" Qu Chuji smiled and replied, "Of all the things I learned in my life, I take comfort in saying that I know a little something about only 3 things. First is medicine. I couldn't master inner strength, but came into contact with a lot of medicinal and herbal knowledge because of that. The second thing is writing a couple of messed up lines of poetry. The little cat-like tricks called Kung Fu that I know can only be placed third." Go Zhaojian replied, "Father, if your Kung Fu can only be called little cat-like tricks, then we 2 brothers can only lay claims to not even rat-like skills." The 3 of them buried the bodies while talking and laughing. After that, they went back into the house and started on the food and drinks again. With all the jinns that Qu Chuji killed today, all of them felt great joys and excitement. Thinking about his wife's pregnancy, Yang Tai-zin could not stop smiling. He thought, "Father here knows poetry, then that means he excels in all facets." So he suggested, "Brother Go's wife is pregnant as well. Could we vex father to think of 2 names?" Qu Chuji thought for a bit and said, "Brother Go's child will be called Go Jing, and Brother Yang's child will be called Yang Kang. It doesn't matter if they are boys or girls, they can still use these names." Go Zhaojian replied, "Great! Father's reminding the 2 of them to remember the disgrace of the year of Jing Kang, the humiliation of the capture of the 2 emperors." Qu Chuji replied, "Thought's right." He reached into his shirt, took out 2 daggers and placed them on the table. This pair of daggers is completely the same in every way with green leather sheaths, gold handguard, and ebony handles. He picked up one of the daggers and carved the words Go Jing on the other dagger's handle. Then he carved Yang Kang on the handle of the first dagger. He carved with great speed and quickness, faster than most people can write. Before Go Zhaojian and Yang Tai-zin can figure out what he was doing, he had already finished carving the words. Smiling, he said, "I do not have anything worthy with me, only this pair of daggers. Why not leave them for the 2 kids?" The 2 men thanked him and took their respective daggers. When the daggers were unsheathed, a sinister coldness came from them. Their blades were obviously very sharp. Qu Chuji explained, "This pair of daggers came into my possession by coincidence. Although they are sharp, their small design does not fit me at all. But the kids can use them to protect themselves. 10 years from now, if I am lucky to be still in this world, I would come to this place again and teach the kids some kung fu. How about it?" The 2 men could not be any happier and thanked him repeatedly. Qu Chuji concluded, "The jinns are occupying the north and torturing the people there. This situation cannot last long. Gentlemen, please take care of yourselves." He picked up his cup of wine and downed it in one gulp. Then he got up and walked out of the door. Go Zhaojian and Yang Tai-zin jumped up and tried to invite him to stay. but his steps were fast and steady as he was already very far away. Go Zhaojian sighed, masters like them are always coming and going like the wind. We were lucky to meet him today. I was thinking of talking to him and asking for his views a bit more, but alas, it was not to be. Yang Taizin smiled and replied, Big brother, at least father was able to kill so many jinns today and vented out some of our anger for us as well. He held up the dagger and unsheathed it again. Gently stroking the blade, he suddenly spoke up, Big brother, I have a stupid idea, tell me what you think of it? Go Zhaojian asked, what is it? Yang Taizin explained, if both our kids are boys, then they will be sworn brothers. If they are girls, then they'll be sworn sisters. Go Zhaojian cuts in, and if it is a boy and a girl, then they'll be husband and wife. The two of them grabbed each other's hand and laughed heartily. Bao Ziruo came back out from inside, smiled and asked, what has made you two so happy? Yang Taizin repeated what they just said to her. Bao Ziruo blushed, but she was happy in her heart as well. Yang Taizin suggested, let's trade our dagger right now as a pledge to the engagement. If they turn out to be sworn brothers or sisters, we can still switch back. If they are a little couple. Go Zhaojian joked, then I'm really very sorry, for both daggers would belong to my family then. Bao Ziruo laughed and replied, you never know, maybe they would both belong to our family instead. So the two men switched daggers right there. Actually, arranging marriages before a child is born happens very often, there was nothing unusual about it. Go Zhaojian took the dagger and happily ran back home to inform his wife. When Li Ping heard it, she was quite happy as well. Playing with the dagger and drinking by himself, Yang Taizin was drunk before he knew it. Bao Ziruo helped her husband onto the bed and collected the dishes and cups. Noticing that it is quite late, she went out to the backyard and collected the chicken cages. As she was closing the back door, she suddenly saw some drops of blood in the snow just in front of the door. Startled, she thought, so not all of the blood was taken care of. If some official sees this, then we would all be in trouble. So she hurriedly grabbed a broom and started sweeping. The drops of blood lead all the way to the woods behind the house. There were also traces of someone crawling along in the snow. Bao Ziruo's suspicion rose as she followed the blood into the pine trees. She arrived behind an old grave and saw something black curled up on the ground. Bao Ziruo walked closer for a better look. It turned out it was a corpse. The man was covered in black, obviously, one of the men that came for Qiuchuji earlier. He probably didn't die right away after being wounded and crawled here. She was just about to go wake her husband to take care of this corpse when she suddenly thought, what if someone came and saw him right at this moment? So she summoned up her strength and went over to the corpse. She wanted to pull it into a bush close by and then go get her husband. But just as she gave a pull, the corpse suddenly twitched and groaned. This scared all the wits out of her. Thinking it was a zombie, she wanted to turn around and run for her life. Yet it was as if her feet were nailed to the ground, she could not move at all. After a long wait, seeing that the corpse did not move again, she gently nudged it with her broom. The corpse groaned again, but this time much weaker. Only now did she realize that the person is still alive. She looked closer and saw that the back of his shoulder was hit by a wolf-fanged arrow. The arrow is embedded deep and the arrow shaft is covered in blood. Snow is still falling and there is already a thin layer of snow on his face. It would only be a little while longer before he is frozen to death. She has always been kind-hearted ever since she was little. If she saw an injured sparrow, frog, or even a bug, she would just have to take it home and take care of it until it has fully recovered. Only then would she release it back. If for some reason she can't nourish it back to health, she would be unhappy for an entire day. This little quirk of hers never changed with her age and led to her house just crawling with small critters of each kind. Her father, being the time-tested country scholar that he is, gave her a name that goes along with this personality of hers, Ziruo, meaning weak pitying. The Bao family in Red Plum Village had an unusually high amount of old roosters and hens. This is because once Bao Ziruo has taken care of a chick, she would never allow even one to be killed. If her parents wanted to eat one, they would have to go and buy one at the market. So the chickens that the family raised all lived to a very old age before dying. Because Yang Taizin loved this flower-like beauty that is his wife, he always went along with whatever she wanted. So naturally, the yard of the Yang house has become the chickens and other little critters' world as well. The little chicks have slowly grown to be adult chickens and ducks. There aren't any old chickens or ducks because she hasn't been in this household for very long. But if things continue as they are, it will only be a matter of time. Right now, seeing this man lying in the snow about to die, her kind heart started to act up. Even though she clearly knows that this man is not good, she can't just watch him bleed and freeze to death. She hesitated for only a second before running back to the house to discuss this with her husband. But Yang Taizin was deep in his sleep because of the wine. No matter what she did, he wouldn't wake up. Figuring that she saved the person first and then worry about the rest, she took out her husband's blood-clotting powder that stops bleeding. Grabbing the small dagger, some pieces of cloth, and half a kettle of warm wine that was on the stove, she ran back to behind the grave. That man was still lying on the ground, not moving. Bao Ziruo helped him sit up and slowly poured what's left of the wine in the kettle into his mouth. She has been taking care of and curing animals ever since she was little, so she has a little bit of medical knowledge. The arrow has embedded itself deep inside of him. Pulling it out might cause blood to shoot out of him and kill him. But if the arrow isn't pulled out, there will be no way to start taking care of the wound. So she gritted her teeth, cut open the flesh around the wound using the dagger, grabbed a hold of the arrow shaft, and gave one hard pull. The man let out a savage scream and passed out. Blood shot out of the wound as Bao Ziruo's shirt was covered with little specks of blood. But that arrow had finally been pulled out. Bao Ziruo's heart was beating like crazy as she anxiously and hurriedly applied the blood-clotting powder onto the wound and firmly bandaged it with the pieces of cloth. After a while, that man slowly began to come around, just that he was too weak and tired to even make a sound. Bao Ziruo had been scared to the point that there is no way for her to gather up enough strength to help move this man. Suddenly an inspiration came to her. She went back home and grabbed a door plank. She dragged the man onto the door plank and then pulled the door plank along the snow as if she was pulling a sled. She pulled him back into the house and set him up in the barn. After being fully occupied for so long, only now did she get the chance to calm down. She switched out of the bloodied shirt and washed her hands and face. She poured out a bowl and finished chicken soup, grabbed a stick of candle, and went to the barn once again to check on that man. When she arrived, that man's breathing was weak but steady. Bao Ziruo felt a little better and started feeding him the chicken soup. That man drank down half a bowl before suddenly breaking out with a violent coughing fit. Startled, Bao Ziruo held up the candle for a closer look. Under the candlelight, she saw the man's delicate features and rather a high nose bridge. Turns out he was actually a very handsome young man. Her face suddenly heated up and her left hand shook, disturbing the candle holder, and several drops of wax fell onto the man's face. That man opened his eyes. In front of him was a face as beautiful as a flower, cheeks blushing red, and eyes like twinkling stars, filled with both sympathy and bashfulness. It was as if this was a dream, as he couldn't help but become spellbound. Bao Ziruo whispered, "Feeling any better? Here, drink the rest of this bowl of soup." That man tried to take the bowl in his hands, but he had no strength in his hands whatsoever and almost spilled it all on himself. Bao Ziruo immediately grabbed the bowl back. At this time the most important thing is to save a life, so she fed him the soup little by little. After drinking all of the soup, that man's eyes slowly gained back some life. He stared at her, obviously grateful beyond words. but Balzairuo was getting embarrassed by the stare. So she grabbed some straw, put it on him to keep him warm, and went back into the house with the candle. She did not sleep well at all for the rest of the night, for she had several nightmares in a row. Suddenly she would see her husband spearing that man to death. But then she would see that man killing her husband with a saber and then start to chase her. She was surrounded by darkness and had nowhere to run or hide. Several times she was scared awake by her dreams, covered with cold sweat. When she woke up in the morning, her husband had already gotten up. Seeing him grinding the spearhead of his spear, her dreams last night came rushing back into her mind. She anxiously made her way to the barn and pushed open the door. Even more startling, there was nobody in the barn, only a messed up pile of straws. The man had disappeared. She ran to the backyard and noticed the back door was only half closed. The snow showed the traces of someone crawling and rolling toward the west. She stared at the traces and became lost in her thoughts. After a long while, a gust of wind came in right at her face as she suddenly felt her waist go sore and bones go soft. Sleepy, she walked back to the main room. Yang Taizin had already made some porridge and put them on the table. Smiling, he said, "See, my porridges aren't that bad after all." Balzairuo knows that her husband is being even more considerate because of her condition. So she smiled, sat down, brought up the bowl, and started to eat the porridge. She figured that if she told her husband about what happened last night, he would be jealous and angry and would no doubt chase the man down and kill him. Then is that not the same as killing the man? So she decided to never mention it at all. Winter ended and spring returned. In a blink of an eye, several months had passed. Balzairuo's waist slowly got bigger as she slowly began to feel more and more weary and tired. And the incident of that night when she saved the man gradually disappeared from her memory. On this particular day, the Yang family had just finished dinner and Balzairuo was sitting by the lamp as she was working on sewing a new pair of trousers for her husband. Yang Taizin was hanging up the 2 pairs of straw sandals he just finished on the wall. Remembering that he broke the head of the plow while working in the fields earlier that day, he turned to Balzairuo and said, "The head of the plow is broken. Tomorrow we'll go to Zhang Miwer on the east side of the village and have him add a bit of iron and take care of it." Balzairuo replied, "All right." Yang Taizin looked at her and said, "I have enough clothing already. Your body is weak and is carrying a baby, you should rest as much as you can. Don't worry about making clothes for me anymore." Balzairuo turned her head towards him and smiled, but her hands did not stop. Yang Taizin walked over and gently took the needle and thread out of her hands. Only now did Balzairuo let out a yawn, blow out the lamp, and went to bed. At midnight, Balzairuo was suddenly snapped out of her dream by the sound of her husband sitting up. Faint sounds of hoofbeats could be heard coming from very far away. The sound came from the west. After a while, hoofbeats started coming from the east as well, followed by sounds coming from the north and south. Balzairuo sat up and asked, "How come there are horses in all 4 directions?" Yang Taizin jumped out of the bed and started to put on clothes. Soon, the hoofbeats were getting closer from all 4 directions and the dogs in the villages started to bark. Yang Taizin replied, "We are surrounded." Shocked, Balzairuo asked, "What for?" Yang Taizin replied, "Don't know." He handed the dagger that Chuji gave him to his wife and said, "Take this, to protect yourself." He took down a spear on the wall and firmly held it in his hands. By now, the horse neighs and the human voices from all 4 directions were loud and chaotic. Yang Taizin opened up a window and looked outside. A group of soldiers had already surrounded the entire village with torches in hand. 7 or 8 of them are galloping back and forth on horsebacks. The soldiers shouted as one, "Catch the traitors, don't let them get away." Yang Taizin thought to himself, "Are they here to catch Kusan? Haven't seen him around recently. Luckily, he isn't here, or else there is no way he could beat all of these soldiers." no matter how great his kung fu is. Suddenly one of the men on a horse shouted, "Go Zhao Jian, Yang Taizin! You two traitors, come out now and get what's coming to you." This shocked Yang Taizin, and Bao Ziruo's face turned white. Yang Taizin whispered to her, "Don't know what's gotten into the authorities, they only know how to malign us normal citizens. We won't get a chance with the authorities. The only thing we can do is run for our lives. Don't panic, with this spear of mine, I can assure you that we'll get out of here." His kung fu was good and had made a living in the martial world before, so even though he is in grave danger, he did not panic. He put the arrow bag onto his back and grabbed his wife's right hand. Bao Ziruo spoke up, "I'll pack." Yang Taizin replied, "Pack what? We're leaving everything." Bao Ziruo's heart suddenly went sour as tears rolled down her cheeks. She said in a shaking voice, "What's going to happen to our home?" Yang Taizin answered, "All we need is to survive. We can start another home somewhere else." Bao Ziruo asked, "What about these little chicks and cats?" Yang Taizin sighed, "Silly, why are you still worrying about them?" After a pause, he tried to console her, "Why would the authorities bother the little chicks and cats?" Just as he finished his sentence, the light from the torches outside fluttered. The soldiers had just lit 2 thatched cottages on fire. 2 more foot soldiers were heading this way with torches to light the house on fire, all the while shouting, "Go Zhao Jian, Yang Taizin! If the 2 of you don't come out now, we'll burn all of Ox Village down to the ground." Yang Taizin had about all he can take, so he opened the door and walked out. He shouted at the top of his lungs, "I am Yang Taizin. What do you people want?" The 2 foot soldiers were shocked as they dropped their torches, turned around, and ran back. In the firelight, a man rode forth on his horse and shouted, "Good, so you are Yang Taizin. Come with us to the magistrate. Seize him." At once, 4 or 5 foot soldiers ran up. Yang Taizin twirled his spear, pulled a white rainbow in the sky, and swept 3 of the soldiers onto the ground. He followed it up with madly deafening spring thunder as he picked up a soldier by the spear shaft and threw him into the crowd. He shouted, "If you want to catch me, first tell me what crimes I committed." That man shouted back, "Traitor! How dare you resist arrest?" Even though he was calling names, he nevertheless feared his foe's courage as well as skill and was afraid to get any closer. Another man on horseback behind him shouted, "Just come with us to the courthouse peacefully, that way there won't be any more punishment to add for your crimes. We have the official document for your arrest here." Yang Taizin replied, "Let me see it." That man replied, "What about the other traitor, Go Zhao Jian?" Go Zhao Jian stuck half of his body out of the window with his bow and arrow and shouted, "Go Zhao Jian is here." The arrow was aimed at the man on horseback. That man's heart felt all hairy as cold waves washed up his back, so he shouted, "Put down your bow and arrow, then I'll read the document to you." Go Zhao Jian viciously shouted back, "Read it now." He pulled his bow full. Seeing that he has no say in the matter, that man brought up the document and read aloud, "Go Zhao Jian and Yang Taizin of Ox Village of the Prefecture of Lunan, colluded with traitors and criminals with intentions of doing wrong. Capture them and bring them in to be strictly judged by the law." Go Zhaotin asked, "Which office issued the order?" The man replied, "Chancellor Han himself." Both Go Zhaotian and Yang Taizin were shocked by this. What could be so important that Han Tuzu himself got involved? Could it be that Father K's actions at night were discovered? Go Zhaotian asked, "Who is the plaintiff? On what evidence?" That man shouted back, "We only worry about capturing you guys. If you guys want to plead your case, then come to the courthouse with us." Yang Dxin shouted back, "Chancellor Han only knows how to do harm to us good honest people, everyone knows that. We won't fall for that lie." The leader shouted in response, "Refusing arrest, that is another crime to your sheet." Yang Taizin turned toward his wife and said, "Quickly put on some more clothes. I'll go get his horse for you." Once I shoot down the leader, the rest of them will panic. The sound of a bow being released was followed by a meteor-like arrow hitting the leader's right shoulder. The leader let out an "Ayo!" before tumbling down onto the ground. All the soldiers shouted in surprise. Another official shouted, "Seize them!" All the soldiers came rushing forth. The two men were shooting arrows one after another, and in an instant, they had already shot down 6 or 7 soldiers. But there were too many of them, as they still managed to charge to the front of both houses. With a loud shout, Yang Taizin jumped out of the door with his spear, making the soldiers back up in surprise and fear. He jumped to the side of an official that was riding a white horse and thrust the spear at him. The official tried to parry with his spear, but Yang family's spear was too fast. Yang Taizin's spear dove down and hit the official on his leg. He then lifted his spear up and flipped the official off his horse. Yang Taizin put his spear shaft on the ground and pushed off, jumping onto the horse. He squeezed his legs, making the horse neigh and gallop towards the house. Yang Taizin killed a soldier by the door with a thrust, leaned down, extended his arms, grabbed Bao Ziruo, and lifted her up onto the horse as well. He then turned and shouted, "Brother, follow me." Go Zhaotian was waving his twin halberds and protecting his wife as he charged out from the crowd. Seeing the ferocity of the two men, none of the soldiers dared to get any closer, so they started to shoot arrows at them. Yang Taizin made his horse run to Li Ping's side and shouted as he jumped off, "Sister, get on." Li Ping anxiously said, "That won't be any good." Yang Taizin didn't care what she said and threw her onto the horse. The two sworn brothers followed behind the horse and slowly walked off while battling off the soldiers. After a bit of walking, suddenly loud shouting came from ahead as another group of soldiers came charging in. The two men silently groaned. As they were looking for another direction to run to, arrows started coming in from ahead. Suddenly, Bao Ziruo screamed, "Ayo!" For her ride was hit by an arrow and fell over, throwing the two women on its back off. Yang Taizin said, "Brother, you guard them, I'll go get another horse." He charged toward the crowd of soldiers. 10 or so soldiers lined up, pointed their spears at Yang Taizin, and let out a yell together. Seeing the overwhelming number of enemies, Go Zhaotian thought, "For us two brothers, escaping is not hard. But with enemies in front and behind, there is no way our wives could escape. It is not like we broke any laws, so going to the courthouse in London to argue our case is much better than dying for no reason here. Last time Father Qiuchuji killed all of the men there, not a single one of them got away. Therefore nobody is there to prove we did it, so the court can't say for sure that we were guilty of anything. Besides, the two of us didn't kill any officials or Jin soldiers." So he yelled, "Brother, stop it. Let's go with them." Yang Taizin was very surprised by this and ran back, dragging his spear behind him. The leader of this group of soldiers ordered the men to stop shooting and surround the two men. Then he shouted, "Throw down your weapons and arrows, then your life will be spared." Yang Taizin spoke up, "Brother, don't fall for their lies." Go Zhaotian shook his head for a while and then threw his twin halberds onto the ground. Yang Taizin looked over at his beloved wife and could not bear the frightened look on her face. He sighed and threw his spear on the ground as well. As soon as both of their weapons fell on the ground, 10 or so long spears immediately came and surrounded the 4 of them. 8-foot soldiers walked up and tied the 4 of them up with their hands behind their backs. Yang Taizin held his head up high and sneered. The leader of the group lifted his horsewhip up and smacked Yang Taizin squarely on his face. "Damn traitor! Do you really want to die?" A welt appeared on Yang Taizin's face from his forehead all the way down to his neck. In a rage, Yang Tixing replied, "Okay. What is your name?" That official got even angrier as his whip came down like rain. "Your old man here is Duan John Deed. Remember that? When you get to the gates of hell you can tell them all about me." Yang Taizin did not back up or flinch at all as he just stood there staring at him. Duan Jiandid continued, "I got a knife scar on my forehead and a birthmark on my face. Can you remember all that?" His whip came down some more. Seeing her husband being treated like this, Bao Ziruo cried out while tears rolled down her cheeks. "He is a good man and has done nothing wrong. Why are you beating him? Don't you know anything about justice?" Yang Taizin suddenly spit at him, hitting him in the face. Furious, Duan Jiandid pulled out his saber and screamed, "I'm going to kill you, traitor, right now." He brought his saber up and swung it down. Yang Taizin sidestepped the strike. The 2-foot soldiers at his side pushed their spears up against his sides to stop him from moving as Duan Jiandid chopped down once again. With nowhere to dodge on the sides, Yang Taizin could only jump back to avoid the strike. Turns out this Duan Jiandid knows a little bit of kung fu. Even though he missed again, he immediately thrust his saber forward. The saber he was using is sawtoothed, and with his move, he sawed a gash on Yang Taizin's left shoulder. He then immediately followed it with another chop. Seeing that his sworn brother's life is in grave danger, Go Zhaojian suddenly jumped up and aimed his feet at Duan Jiandid's face. In shock, Duan Jiandid brought his sword back to parry this away. Even though Go Zhaojian's hands were tied behind his back, his footwork was still quite formidable. So before his body fell down, he twirled his left leg and brought it back and, at the same time, sent out his right leg, hitting Duan Jiandid in his stomach. In extreme pain and rage, Duan Jiandid shouted, "Stick those spears in them. Orders from above, if the traitor resists arrest, then kill them all." The soldiers stabbed forth with their spears. Go Zhaojian kicked down 2 soldiers in a row, but with his hands tied behind his back, his quickness was restricted as he had to jump away from spears. Duan Jiandid came up from behind them and swung down hard, chopping Go Zhaojian's entire right arm off at the shoulders. Yang Taizin was trying to struggle out of the ropes, but could not, no matter how hard he tried. Suddenly, seeing his sworn brother wounded on the ground, a surge of strength came from nowhere inside of him. He snapped the ropes off his body, punched a soldier, grabbed his spear, and whipped out the Yang family spear. This time he is fighting without regards to his own life. It was as if he could take on tens of thousands of soldiers all by himself. He had just started but had already taken down 2 soldiers. Seeing that the situation has turned, Duan Jiandid immediately back away. Last time Yang Taizin was holding back somewhat, not really wanting to kill government soldiers. But now he could not care less. Flicking right and swinging left, he killed several soldiers in an instant. Seeing his ferociousness, the rest of the soldiers scattered at once. Yang Taizin did not bother chasing them as he helped his sworn brother sit up. Blood is gushing out where Go Zhaojian's arm was chopped off, and by now his whole body was covered in blood. Yang Taizin could not stop his tears from falling down at the sight. Go Zhaojian gritted his teeth and shouted out, "Brother, don't worry about me, leave now." Yang Taizin replied desperately, "I'm going to get a horse, and then I'm going to fight until I die to make sure you escape." Go Zhaojian faintly replied, No. He passed out. Yang Taizin took off his outer shirt so he can bandage up the wound. But Duan Jiandid chopped off his shoulder and portions of his chest as well. The wound is almost half a body in length, impossible to bandage up. Go Zhaojian had slowly come to and shouted, "Brother, go save our wives. I can't make it." Before he finished what he was saying, he slumped over and died.